You moved our assets.
You approved every transfer. Every signature is valid.
No unauthorized transfer was found.
But the contracts gave him options. Every job stays. Once you sign, they can't undo it. Then let the documents speak.
Anthony Ortiz was 39, a senior financial operations manager in Columbus, Ohio. Most people at the Brooks family's retirement gala believed he was simply Faith's quiet husband, a man who lived comfortably on his wealthy in-laws' success. He still drove an aging Honda Accord, packed his own lunch, and wore the same steel watch every day. What they didn't know was that nearly every major asset the Brooks family owned rested inside legal structures only Anthony fully understood. Then Eleanor Brooks stepped forward, accused him of stealing, and slapped him once, twice, then a third time. Anthony never raised a hand. He only looked at Charles Brooks, gently touched his burning cheek, and remained silent. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you love slow burn stories filled with unexpected twists, quiet strength, and satisfying justice, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's story. Anthony Ortiz woke every weekday at exactly 5:15 a.m. No alarm ever rang twice. The digital clock beside the bed flashed 5:15 in pale blue numbers. Anthony reached over, silenced it, and sat on the edge of the bed for a few seconds before standing. It was a habit formed during years when every minute mattered. Outside, Columbus was still dark. The neighborhood remained quiet, except for the distant rumble of delivery trucks heading toward Interstate 70. He brewed coffee in an old stainless steel French press, instead of buying expensive coffee downtown. While it steeped, he packed his lunch into the same insulated navy bag he had carried for nearly 4 years. Turkey sandwich, apple, Greek yogurt, bottle of water. Nothing changed unless it needed to. Faith often joked years earlier that she could predict every Wednesday because Anthony's lunch looked exactly like every Tuesday. He had smiled. Routine made fewer mistakes. By 6:10, he backed his 6-year-old Honda Accord out of the driveway. The Brooks family owned luxury SUVs worth more than his annual salary when he first married into the family. Anthony never cared. His Accord had 143,000 miles. It had never missed a payment. It had never stranded him. That mattered more. At Brooks Home Supply Group headquarters on the east side of Columbus, the parking lot was nearly empty. Security guard Marcus Jenkins nodded from inside the entrance. "Morning, Mr. Ortiz." "Morning, Marcus." Anthony knew every overnight guard by name. He also knew which ones had grandchildren, which ones worked second jobs, which ones brought homemade chili during winter shifts. People noticed things like that. They rarely forgot them. He reached the 4th floor before sunrise, painted orange across the city skyline. Rows of office lights remained dark, except for one. His. Anthony unlocked his office and placed a thick binder on the desk. The cover read, "Quarterly Risk Assessment." No one else enjoyed reading reports before breakfast. Anthony did. Every spreadsheet represented decisions. Every decision represented families depending on steady paychecks. He never forgot that. At 7:42 a.m., employees slowly filled the floor. Phones rang, printers started humming, coffee machines became crowded. Anthony was already reviewing warehouse insurance renewals from Cincinnati and Toledo. His assistant, Karen Mitchell, stepped inside. "You've already finished the Midwest inventory report." Anthony nodded. "It needed corrections." Karen laughed softly. "They always do." She wasn't exaggerating. Anthony had a reputation. He found mistakes other people overlooked: a misplaced decimal, a duplicate invoice, an insurance renewal scheduled 3 days late, a supplier charging twice for the same freight shipment. None of those discoveries earned applause. They simply prevented disasters before anyone noticed. That was enough for him. Around 10 that morning, Charles Brooks entered the office without announcing himself. Even at 67, Charles still carried himself like the businessman who had built Brooks Home Supply Group from one warehouse into a regional distribution company operating across Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. He closed Anthony's office door. "You've got a minute." Anthony stood. "Always." Charles sat without ceremony. "I looked over the Louisville expansion numbers." Anthony waited. Charles placed the folder on the desk. "You saved us nearly $4 million. Anthony corrected him. "The legal team and accounting department did." Charles shook his head. "No. You designed the structure. You just refused to put your name on it." Anthony smiled politely. "The company needed the savings." Charles studied him for several seconds. "You know why people underestimate you?" Anthony shrugged. "They're busy." Charles chuckled. "That's one way to put it." Another pause followed. "I appreciate what you've done." Anthony simply nodded. Neither man liked dramatic conversations. They preferred results. Charles left. By lunchtime, the executive floor buzzed with preparations for his retirement celebration, scheduled later that week at the Grand River Ballroom downtown. Employees discussed decorations, catering, guest lists, photographers. Anthony avoided all of it. He reviewed transportation contracts instead. At exactly 12:15, he ate lunch alone in the employee courtyard beneath a maple tree. Warehouse supervisor Luis Ramirez walked over carrying a plastic container. "Mind if I join you?" Anthony gestured toward the empty bench. Luis sat. "You know," he said, "everyone thinks you'll be the next CFO." Anthony laughed once. "I think everyone is wrong." "You always say that." "Because it's true." Luis frowned. "You've kept this company alive more than once." Anthony took another bite of his sandwich. "The warehouse crews kept it alive. The drivers kept it alive. The people loading trucks at 5 in the morning kept it alive." Luis smiled. "See? That's exactly why everyone likes you." Anthony changed the subject. "How's your daughter's first semester?" The conversation moved away from business. It always did. That afternoon, another family dinner invitation arrived by text. Saturday. Charles's retirement celebration. Formal attire. Anthony stared at the message for several seconds. Family dinners had become predictable over the years. Eleanor Brooks would ask questions she already believed she knew the answers to. She would compare Anthony to more successful husbands within her social circle. Someone would mention expensive vacations, luxury homes, investment portfolios. Eventually, Eleanor would smile politely before saying something that sounded harmless to strangers, but landed like sandpaper. Anthony's always been so practical. He doesn't really understand high society. He's fortunate Faith never cared about money. Small sentences, sharp edges. Anthony rarely responded. Faith used to defend him. She would squeeze his hand beneath the table. Change the subject. Laugh it away. Over the last 2 years, those moments had disappeared. Now she usually remained quiet. Sometimes she even smiled politely to avoid upsetting her mother. Anthony noticed. He never mentioned it. Late that afternoon, Karen entered his office again. "Everyone's heading downstairs." "What for?" "Retirement planning meeting. You should come." Anthony saved his work. "I'll be there." The conference room overflowed with department managers, marketing directors, warehouse supervisors, regional executives. A giant display listed accomplishments celebrating Charles Brooks' 43 years in business. Every division head presented achievements, sales, operations, logistics, human resources. When the chief operating officer discussed the company's financial stability after the supply chain crisis. 3 years earlier, applause filled the room. Anthony quietly recognized several charts. He had built the models behind them. No one mentioned his name. He expected nothing else. After the meeting ended, 2 younger analysts stopped him near the elevator. "Mr. Ortiz," Anthony turned. One looked nervous. "We just wanted to thank you." For what? You stayed late almost every night during COVID. You fixed things nobody else wanted. Anthony smiled. We all stayed late. The younger analyst shook his head. No. You stayed longest. Anthony didn't answer. He simply wished them a good evening. Outside rain had started falling over downtown Columbus. Traffic crawled along Broad Street. Anthony drove home listening to local public radio. No music, no podcasts, just quiet voices discussing weather and state budgets. The house lights were already on when he arrived. Faith stood inside the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Long day. Anthony removed his jacket. Nothing unusual, she hesitated. My mom called. Anthony nodded once. I figured. She wants us there early Saturday. What time, Sue? 3. I'll be ready. Faith looked as though she wanted to continue the conversation. Instead, she simply returned to her phone. Silence settled across the kitchen. Not angry, not comfortable either, just unfamiliar. After dinner, Anthony walked upstairs to his small home office. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Nothing looked remarkable. Tax records, insurance files, corporate binders, neatly labeled boxes. He opened one cabinet and removed a thick blue folder marked Board Resolutions. He didn't read every page. He only confirmed that everything remained exactly where it belonged. Signed, dated, witnessed, archived. His phone vibrated. A new email had arrived. The sender was the Brooks Home Supply Group corporate secretary. The subject line contained only 4 words. Board documents, urgent. Anthony's expression remained calm. But before opening the attachment, he quietly closed and locked the office door. Anthony stared at the email for several seconds before opening it. The sender was Linda Foster, the long-time corporate secretary of Brooks Home Supply Group. There was no greeting, only one sentence. Attached are the proposed agenda and resolutions for Monday's special board meeting. Anthony downloaded the attachment. 23 pages. He read every line once. Then he read them again. Nothing in the document appeared illegal. That bothered him more than if it had. The proposed resolutions would authorize what appeared to be a routine corporate restructuring, committee appointments, budget adjustments, updated executive reporting procedures, new oversight responsibilities. On the surface, they looked ordinary. Anthony had written documents that looked almost identical hundreds of times. The danger wasn't what the pages said. It was what they quietly removed. His access to several financial reporting systems would be transferred to another executive. His authority to approve vendor payments over $200,000 would disappear. The Finance Governance Committee, a committee he had built nearly 6 years earlier, would suddenly report to someone else. Every change looked small by itself. Together they formed a clear pattern. Someone wanted Anthony out. He closed the document. His expression never changed. Instead of calling anyone, he opened a locked cabinet and removed a thick black binder. Every board resolution from the previous 8 years was organized chronologically. Tabs, dates, signatures, meeting minutes. Nothing was missing. He compared Monday's proposal against resolutions approved 3 years earlier. Exactly what he suspected. Several new paragraphs directly contradicted earlier agreements. Not illegally, but strategically. Someone assumed nobody would notice. Anthony noticed. He always did. He returned every document to its proper place before leaving the office. Nothing good came from making emotional decisions late at night. The next morning began exactly like every other. Coffee, lunch, drive, work. Only one thing differed. Faith barely looked up from her phone during breakfast. I'll probably stay with Mom most of tomorrow, she said. Anthony poured coffee into a travel mug. For the retirement party? There's still decorating. He nodded. Okay. She waited, almost as if she expected him to object. He didn't. Arguments required 2 people. Anthony refused to volunteer. As she gathered her purse, Faith finally asked the question that had been sitting between them for weeks. "Do you ever think my family actually respects you?" Anthony looked at her carefully. "I don't spend much time wondering." "You should." "Why?" "Because they don't." Silence settled between them. Faith sighed. "My mother thinks you've become secretive." Anthony remained calm. "About what?" "I don't know. That's the problem." She left without answering. Anthony stood alone in the kitchen. Years earlier, Faith would have laughed at accusations like that. Now she repeated them. Not with anger, with uncertainty. That worried him more. At Brooks' headquarters, rumors moved faster than emails. 2 department managers stopped talking when Anthony entered the elevator. A vice president avoided eye contact. Someone from Human Resources smiled too politely. Corporate buildings developed their own weather systems. Pressure traveled invisibly. Anthony could almost feel it. Around noon, Charles Brooks appeared again. This time he carried no folders, only 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Anthony. "Walk with me." They left the building and crossed the employee parking lot toward a small pond behind the headquarters. Neither spoke immediately. Charles finally broke the silence. "Something's changing." Anthony looked across the water. "I know." "You saw Monday's agenda?" "Yes." Charles exhaled slowly. "I didn't approve those revisions." "I believe you." Charles stopped walking. "Eleanor has been spending more time with several board members." Anthony said nothing. "I think she's convinced them you're controlling too much." Anthony smiled faintly. "I'm controlling spreadsheets. She thinks you're controlling the company." Anthony looked back toward headquarters. "The company controls itself." Charles laughed quietly. "You always answer like that." "It usually works." Charles became serious again. "I need to ask you something." Anthony waited. "If this gets ugly," he hesitated. "Are we protected?" Anthony considered the question. Every answer mattered. "The company is protected." Charles frowned. "That's not exactly what I asked." "No, it isn't." For a moment, neither man spoke. Charles understood. Anthony wasn't refusing to answer. He was refusing to speculate. Business required facts, not predictions. Before returning inside, Charles placed one hand on Anthony's shoulder. "I should have stopped Eleanor years ago." Anthony met his eyes. "You still can." Charles didn't reply. The retirement celebration occupied nearly every conversation over the next 2 days. Caterers arrived. Floral arrangements filled conference rooms. Gift baskets lined hallways. Employees rehearsed speeches. Anthony avoided all of it. Instead, he spent nearly 10 hours reviewing insurance renewals, inventory financing agreements, and transportation contracts. Karen eventually laughed. "You're the only person in this building pretending the party doesn't exist." Anthony smiled. "The trucks still leave Monday morning." "They always do." "Exactly." Late Friday afternoon, Victoria Nguyen called. She had worked alongside Anthony for nearly 7 years. Certified public accountant, forensic accounting specialist, one of the few professionals who understood every layer of the company's financial structure. "You have a minute?" she asked. "Of course." "I reviewed next week's restructuring packet." Anthony leaned back. "So did I." There was a brief silence. Finally, she spoke carefully. "Someone's trying to move responsibilities. I noticed." "They're doing it awkwardly." "I noticed that too." Victoria lowered her voice. "Should I be worried?" Anthony answered honestly. "Not yet." "Should you be? I'll know Monday." She trusted his judgment. "I'll make sure every archive is backed up." "Thank you." After hanging up, Anthony opened another secure folder on his computer. Every document had already been copied. Twice. Digital archives, encrypted drives, physical originals, off-site storage. Years earlier, one of his mentors had given him simple advice. Good memories lose lawsuits. Good records win them. Anthony never forgot. Saturday arrived clear and warm. The retirement celebration would begin at 6. Faith planned to leave home shortly after noon to help her mother. She stood in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening a pair of pearl earrings. Without turning around, she spoke. "My mom asked something yesterday." Anthony adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. "What?" "She wondered why you insist on keeping copies of everything." Anthony answered immediately. "It's my job." "She thinks it's excessive." "It probably is." Faith turned toward him. "Anthony." He waited. Is there anything you're not telling me?" The question hung quietly in the room. Anthony could hear children playing outside, a lawnmower several houses away, the air conditioner humming. He answered without hesitation. "No." Faith searched his face. "You've changed." Anthony smiled gently. "No. I've become quieter." "There's a difference." She looked unconvinced. "I'm serious." "So am I." Another silence, longer this time. Finally, Faith picked up her purse. "I'll see you downtown." "I'll be there." After she left, Anthony walked into his home office once more. He unlocked the cabinet containing the black binders. One by one he checked labels, operating agreements, shareholder consents, board minutes, holding companies, asset registers. Everything remained exactly where it belonged. He closed the cabinet, locked it, slipped the key into his pocket. Then his phone vibrated. A text message from Charles appeared. "Please come 30 minutes early. I have something important to show you before everyone arrives." Anthony read the message twice. For the first time in years, he felt something close to concern. Not fear, concern. Because Charles Brooks almost never sent text messages. And he never described anything as important, unless it truly was. Anthony picked up his car keys quietly, locked the front door behind him, and started driving toward the Grand River Ballroom, unaware that before the evening ended, 3 slaps would change every relationship in the Brooks family forever. The Grand River Ballroom overlooked the Scioto River, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the golden light of early evening. Anthony arrived exactly 30 minutes before the official reception. Not 28, not 35, 30. His Honda Accord looked almost out of place beside imported luxury sedans and oversized black SUVs lined along the valet entrance. He handed his keys to the attendant with a polite smile. "Take your time," he said. The young valet looked surprised. "Sir, I'm in no hurry." Inside, florists were making final adjustments to white orchids arranged across round tables covered with ivory linen. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over polished marble floors, while servers carefully aligned rows of champagne glasses that caught the light like mirrors. The room looked less like a retirement party and more like a political fundraiser. That was Eleanor Brooks's influence. Appearances mattered, details mattered, image mattered most. Anthony quietly checked his watch. 5:32. Charles had asked him to arrive early for a reason. He walked past the ballroom toward a smaller conference suite reserved for private meetings. The door stood slightly open. Charles was already inside. He looked older than he had only a week before. His gray suit fit perfectly, yet his shoulders carried an unfamiliar weight. "You came." "I said I would." Charles closed the door behind him. No greetings, no small talk. He placed a thick envelope on the conference table. "I want you to have these." Anthony glanced down. Original corporate documents, board resolutions, signed operating agreements, shareholder amendments. He recognized every signature before opening the first page. "You already have copies," Anthony said. "I know. I want you to have the originals." Anthony looked up. Why? Charles slowly removed his glasses. Because I don't trust what's happening anymore. Silence settled between them. Charles continued. Eleanor has been organizing private meetings. I suspected that. Not just with board members. Anthony waited. She's been talking with Faith. That did not surprise him. It disappointed him, but it did not surprise him. Charles walked toward the window overlooking the river. I built this company 43 years ago. I know. I always thought the hardest part would be growing it. He smiled sadly. It turns out protecting your own family from itself is much harder. Anthony said nothing. Charles turned around. I need you to answer one question. If I can. If something happens tonight, he paused. Can the business survive? Anthony considered every word before answering. Yes. Charles frowned slightly. And the family? Anthony's eyes remained steady. I don't know. Charles accepted the answer because it was honest. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Charles nodded toward the envelope. Keep those. I will. And Anthony? Yes. I'm sorry. Anthony understood exactly what he meant. Not one specific incident, years of them. He simply nodded once. There isn't anything to apologize for tonight. Charles almost smiled. I wish that were true. A knock interrupted them. Linda Foster opened the door. The guests are beginning to arrive. Charles straightened his jacket. Thank you. As she disappeared down the hallway, Charles looked toward Anthony one last time. No matter what happens, he hesitated. Don't let anger make decisions. Anthony answered quietly. It never has. Together they walked toward the ballroom. The room had transformed. Nearly 200 guests filled the space. Business owners, regional politicians, longtime suppliers, community leaders, former employees, family friends. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of appetizers. Anthony recognized dozens of faces: warehouse managers from Cincinnati, distribution supervisors from Louisville, store directors from Indianapolis. Nearly every person greeted him warmly. Anthony, good to see you. How's Mason doings? Still fixing everyone else's problems. He smiled politely and kept moving. Several executives shook his hand. None of them treated him like an outsider. That was always the difference. The people who worked with Anthony respected him. The people who judged him socially rarely did. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Brooks stood surrounded by guests. Her emerald evening gown matched the polished confidence she carried into every room. She laughed loudly, accepted compliments effortlessly, directed servers without ever looking at them. Faith stood nearby in a navy dress, greeting arriving guests beside her mother. Anthony watched for only a moment. Years earlier, Faith would have searched the room until she found him. Their eyes would meet. She would smile. Tonight she didn't. Not because she ignored him intentionally, because Eleanor had already begun another conversation before Faith noticed him. Anthony walked toward the refreshments instead. Marcus Hill, the company's logistics director, joined him. You clean up pretty well. Anthony smiled. So do you. Marcus laughed. My wife picked the suit. I figured. They talked about shipping delays along Interstate 71, rising fuel costs, and warehouse automation. Normal conversations, comfortable conversations, business conversations. Exactly the kind Anthony preferred. Across the room, Eleanor glanced toward him more than once. Anthony noticed. He always noticed. He simply pretended not to. An hour passed. Guests settled into assigned seats. The lights dimmed slightly as dinner service began. Charles delivered a short speech thanking employees, partners, and customers who had supported Brooks Home Supply Group through 4 decades of growth. His remarks received genuine applause. Then came the family tributes. Faith spoke first. She thanked her father for teaching resilience. Her voice shook slightly with emotion. Charles smiled proudly. Next came Eleanor. She spoke confidently about sacrifice, reputation, and preserving the Brooks family legacy for future generations. Several guests applauded before she finished. Anthony listened quietly. One sentence lingered in his mind. Our family's future depends on knowing exactly who deserves our trust. Most people considered it an ordinary line. Anthony wasn't most people. He heard the emphasis. Trust. After dessert, guests stood and mingled once again. Charles disappeared into conversations with longtime friends. Anthony stepped onto the outdoor terrace overlooking the river. The evening air felt cooler outside. He welcomed the silence. Footsteps approached behind him. Faith. She stood beside him without speaking. For nearly a minute, they watched boats drift slowly across the water. Finally, she broke the silence. You've barely talked to anyone. I've talked to plenty of people. You know what I mean. Anthony nodded. I do. Faith folded her arms. My mother thinks you've been avoiding her. Anthony almost smiled. I haven't had the opportunity. She says you've changed. Anthony looked across the river instead of at his wife. People usually say that when someone stops arguing. Faith sighed. I wish things weren't so tense. So do I. She hesitated before asking another question. Did Dad give you something earlier? Anthony answered truthfully. Yes. What? Some documents. What kind of documents? Oh, business records. Faith studied his face. He never gives anyone originals. Anthony remained calm. He did today. She looked puzzled. Before she could ask another question, Eleanor's voice echoed from inside the ballroom. Faith. Faith turned. I'm coming. She looked back toward Anthony. I'll find you later. I'll be here. She disappeared inside. Anthony remained on the terrace for another minute. The cool breeze carried distant music from the ballroom. Everything looked peaceful, ordered, elegant. Yet beneath the polished celebration, something had shifted. Charles had handed him original corporate records. Faith had begun asking direct questions. Eleanor had repeatedly spoken about trust. Pieces were moving. Anthony simply didn't know who had made the first move. He returned to the ballroom just as Linda Foster hurried across the room toward Charles, whispering something urgently into his ear. Charles's expression changed immediately. He slowly turned his head toward Anthony. Then, almost instinctively, his eyes shifted toward Eleanor. Whatever Linda had just told him, it had nothing to do with retirement. And before the music ended, the celebration itself would no longer matter. Anthony watched Charles from across the ballroom. The older man's face had lost its relaxed expression. Whatever Linda Foster had whispered moments earlier had erased the warmth from the evening. Charles excused himself from a group of former suppliers and walked toward the stage once again. Before he reached it, Eleanor intercepted him. She smiled for the guests. She did not smile with her eyes. From where Anthony stood, he couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read enough from their posture. Charles tried to continue walking. Eleanor blocked his path. She spoke quickly. He answered once. She shook her head. Then she looked directly across the room. At Anthony. The glance lasted only a second. Long enough. Anthony quietly set his untouched glass of sparkling water on a nearby table. Marcus Hill approached. Everything okay? I think we're about to find out. Marcus followed Anthony's eyes toward Eleanor. I've never seen Charles look like that. Neither have I. The jazz quartet finished its final song. Conversations gradually faded as guests turned toward the stage. Linda adjusted the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's celebration, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks would like to say a few additional words. Charles's shoulders stiffened. That announcement had not been planned. Anthony knew because he had reviewed the event schedule earlier that afternoon. Eleanor walked confidently onto the stage, accepting the microphone with practiced ease. The room applauded. She waited until the applause disappeared. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate my husband's remarkable career." Another round of applause. She smiled gracefully. For more than 40 years, Charles has built a company founded on trust. Anthony remained still. The Brooks name has always represented honesty. Her voice carried easily through the ballroom. And when that trust is threatened, she paused. It becomes our responsibility to protect what generations have built. Anthony noticed dozens of confused expressions. No one understood where she was going. He suspected he did. Eleanor looked directly at him. "Anthony?" Every head turned. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Would you mind joining me for a moment?" Anthony walked forward without hesitation. His footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. No rushing, no visible emotion, just steady movement. When he reached the stage, Eleanor stepped aside just enough to face both him and the audience. "You've worked with our company for several years." "I have." "You've handled financial restructuring." "Yes." "You've overseen numerous asset transfers." "I've overseen legally approved transactions." A faint smile crossed Eleanor's face. "So you admit it?" Anthony didn't answer immediately. "I admitted exactly what I said." Soft murmurs spread through the crowd. Eleanor raised a folder. "I've spent weeks reviewing company records." Anthony recognized the folder immediately. Copies, not originals. "I discovered something disturbing." Charles stepped forward. "Eleanor." She raised one hand without looking at him. "Please." Then she turned back toward Anthony. "Can you explain why so many valuable company assets no longer appear directly under Brooks Home Supply Group?" Anthony answered calmly. "They were reorganized. Into companies most people have never heard of." "Yes." "And who created those companies?" "I did." Several guests exchanged nervous glances. Eleanor seized the moment. "There. You heard him?" "He admits it." Anthony remained motionless. "He created shell companies. He moved assets. He hid ownership." Every sentence grew louder. Faith stood frozen near the front table. Her face reflected confusion more than agreement. Anthony finally spoke. "The restructuring was approved unanimously by the board." Eleanor laughed sharply. "That's your excuse." "It isn't an excuse. It's a fact." She opened the folder dramatically, holding several documents high enough for nearby guests to see. "These signatures mean nothing if someone manipulated the process." Anthony recognized photocopies of board resolutions. He also recognized that several pages were incomplete. Attachments were missing. Referenced exhibits had been removed. Whether intentionally or accidentally, the documents told only half the story. Anthony knew it. He also knew this wasn't the place to argue. Charles walked onto the stage. "That's enough." "No." Eleanor's voice cut through the ballroom. "It is not enough." She turned toward the audience again. "Do you know what I believe?" Silence. "I believe this man has been quietly stealing control of our family's company for years." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone lifted a phone, then another. Within seconds, several guests were recording. Anthony noticed. He didn't react. Eleanor stepped closer. "You married my daughter. You earned our trust. And all this time..." She held the folder against his chest. "Where?" "You've been planning to take everything." Anthony looked down at the papers before looking back into Eleanor's eyes. "No. No. No." "Then explain it." "This isn't the place." "Oh, I think it is." She smiled bitterly. You've hidden behind silence for years. Speak. Anthony answered quietly enough that the microphone barely amplified his voice. Every transaction was reviewed by attorneys, accountants, and every member of the board. Liar! The word echoed through the ballroom. Charles moved forward again. Eleanor, stop this. She ignored him completely. Faith finally spoke. Mom. But her voice disappeared beneath Eleanor's. I welcomed you into my family. I defended you. I tolerated your ordinary little life. Anthony remained expressionless. And this is how you repay us. Several guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked fascinated. No one intervened. Eleanor took another step. You've embarrassed this family, Anthony answered with the same calm tone. I've done everything this family asked me to do. Her hand moved before anyone realized it. Crack. The first slap echoed through the ballroom. Anthony's head turned slightly with the impact. The room froze. Even the musicians stopped moving. Anthony slowly faced her again. He neither stepped backward nor raised a hand. His cheek reddened almost immediately. Eleanor breathed heavily. Answer me. Anthony said nothing. The silence infuriated her more than any insult could have. Crack. The second slap landed harder. A woman near the front table covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "My God." Charles reached for Eleanor's arm. She pulled away. Faith stood completely still. Anthony looked at her for only a second. She did not move. She did not speak. She did not tell her mother to stop. That silence hurt more than either slap. Anthony lowered his eyes briefly. Not in surrender, simply collecting himself. When he looked up again, his expression hadn't changed. No anger, no hatred, only quiet disappointment. Eleanor pointed a trembling finger toward him. Say something. Anthony inhaled once. I have nothing to defend. You thief out, crack. The third slap struck with enough force to knock his watch against the edge of the podium. Its metal bracelet clicked loudly against the wood. The sound lingered in the silence. Anthony reached up slowly. His fingertips brushed the burning skin along his left cheek. He looked first at Faith. She couldn't meet his eyes. Then he looked at Charles. The older man appeared devastated. Finally, Anthony spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough for the room to hear. You'll soon understand what every signature actually meant. Eleanor laughed dismissively. Is that supposed to frighten me? Anthony didn't answer. He stepped around her without touching her, walked past the stunned guests, past dozens of raised phones, past whispered conversations. Marcus Hill instinctively moved aside. Karen Mitchell stared in disbelief. No one stopped him. Outside, the cool evening air met his face. The sting from the slaps remained. He reached into his jacket and removed his phone. Only one number mattered now. Benjamin Carter. The corporate attorney answered before the second ring. I've been expecting your call. Anthony looked back once at the brightly lit ballroom. They made the first move. Benjamin's voice remained steady. Then it's time we make ours. Anthony ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and quietly walked toward the parking lot, leaving behind a celebration that had just become the opening scene of a battle none of them truly understood. Benjamin Carter's office overlooked Capitol Square. The lights inside were still on when Anthony arrived. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Most law firms had gone quiet hours earlier. Benjamin's had not. The receptionist recognized Anthony immediately. They're waiting for you. Not he. They. Anthony expected that. When he entered the main conference room, Benjamin stood beside a wall covered with legal pads. Victoria Nguyen was already seated at the long walnut table with 3 laptops open and 6 archive boxes arranged in precise order. No one mentioned the red mark still visible across Anthony's left cheek. Benjamin simply nodded. You drove yourself? I did. Good. Anthony took a seat. Benjamin closed the conference room door. For the record, he said, this meeting is protected by attorney-client privilege. Anthony nodded once. Benjamin looked toward Victoria. Let's begin. Victoria slid the first archive box across the table. Year 1. Anthony opened it. Inside were original operating agreements for 3 limited liability companies established almost 8 years earlier. Each document carried notarized signatures. Charles Brooks, Eleanor Brooks, 2 outside directors. Benjamin tapped the first page. Read Article 4. Anthony already knew every word. Benjamin read it aloud anyway. The financial operations manager shall oversee the implementation of all restructuring approved by unanimous board vote and shall retain authority to execute related administrative transfers as authorized herein. Benjamin looked around the room. Who held that position? Anthony. And who voted for this resolution? Victoria answered. Every board member. She slid another document forward. The minutes from that meeting. Anthony watched as Benjamin highlighted each signature. Charles, Eleanor, Linda Foster, outside counsel, independent auditors. Nothing had been hidden. Everything had been documented. Benjamin leaned back. They didn't give you power. They assigned you responsibility, Anthony corrected him. They assigned responsibility. Authority existed only because they approved it. Benjamin smiled. Exactly. Victoria opened another binder. Year 3. More documents appeared. Holding company registrations, warehouse ownership transfers, equipment leasing agreements, insurance restructuring. Anthony had drafted none of them alone. Every major decision had been reviewed by specialists, tax attorneys, outside accountants, commercial lenders, state regulators. The work had taken years. Benjamin picked up a yellow legal pad. Let's address the accusation. He stole company assets. He looked directly at Anthony. Did you? No. Did you transfer assets? Yes. Were those transfers authorized? Yes. By whom? The board. Benjamin pointed toward the growing stack of signed resolutions. Good. Victoria opened a spreadsheet. The warehouses everyone keeps talking about. She rotated the screen. There are 12. Anthony studied the familiar numbers. Only 4 were ever owned directly by Brooks Home Supply Group. Benjamin nodded. The remaining 8. They're owned by separate holding companies, Victoria continued. And why, Anthony answered without hesitation. To isolate liability. If one operating company was sued, the real estate remained protected. Benjamin looked satisfied. Perfectly legal. Victoria clicked another tab. Now let's discuss the distribution centers. She displayed a timeline beginning 7 years earlier. The family believed Anthony was creating unnecessary complexity. She looked at Benjamin. In reality, every restructuring reduced taxes, lowered insurance costs, and protected physical assets from operational risk. Benjamin folded his hands. How much money did those changes save? Victoria didn't need to calculate. Approximately $48 million over 7 years. The room became quiet. Not because anyone doubted the number, because everyone understood what it meant. Anthony had never once claimed credit. Benjamin broke the silence. So, why would Eleanor believe you were hiding assets? Anthony considered the question carefully. Because assets moved. But ownership didn't disappear. It changed structure. Benjamin nodded. And structure is invisible to people who never read documents. Victoria reached into another archive box. This is important. She removed a thick blue binder labeled Asset Management Authority. Inside were dozens of authorizations signed over several years. Benjamin flipped through them rapidly. Charles delegated implementation. Eleanor approved. The board ratified. He stopped at one page. There. Anthony recognized it immediately. It had been signed during the pandemic. The company had faced severe supply chain disruptions. Banks were tightening commercial lending. 3 competitors had declared bankruptcy. Brooks Home Supply Group had survived. Barely. Benjamin tapped the signature page. This resolution granted temporary emergency authority. Victoria finished the sentence. To complete restructuring without waiting for monthly board meetings when delays would threaten company operations. Benjamin looked toward Anthony. Did you abuse that authority? No. Can we prove it? Victoria smiled slightly. We already have. She opened another laptop. Every transaction appeared chronologically. Approval requests, email chains, board notifications, accounting entries, external audit confirmations, bank acknowledgments. Nothing existed without documentation. Benjamin stood and walked toward a whiteboard. He drew 3 circles, one labeled facts, another emotion, the third law. Eleanor is operating here. He pointed to emotion. The guests at that ballroom reacted here. Again, emotion. He tapped facts. This is where Victoria lives. Finally, he pointed to law. This is where I work. Then he looked at Anthony. And you, Anthony answered quietly. I stay wherever the documents are. Benjamin smiled. Exactly. He erased the board. We're not filing a defamation lawsuit. Anthony nodded. I don't want one. We're not seeking damages over tonight. I know. We're not responding publicly. Anthony agreed. No interviews. No statements. No social media. Benjamin leaned forward. We're going to do something much more effective. Victoria already understood. We're going to enforce contracts. Benjamin nodded. Every one of them. He opened another folder. Operating Agreement 7B, Article 9. Anthony remembered it immediately. Years earlier, lenders had insisted on stronger governance provisions before approving refinancing. The family had signed everything. Most never read beyond the executive summaries. Benjamin highlighted one paragraph. If designated governance responsibilities are materially obstructed or revoked without compliance with these agreements, the managing officer may initiate contractual review, demand ownership verification, suspend designated authority transfers, and require immediate compliance before continuation of operations. Anthony looked up. So the first step is verification. Correct. Victoria added another point. Verification triggers lender review. And lender review requires updated ownership confirmations. Benjamin nodded again, which means banks begin asking questions. Anthony finally understood the sequence. No accusations. No retaliation. Just procedure. Benjamin smiled. Procedure is usually unstoppable. Victoria checked another checklist. Insurance carriers receive notices. Commercial lenders receive notices. Title companies verify ownership. Independent auditors confirm asset registers. Benjamin closed the final binder. Everything happens automatically because the agreements require it. Anthony sat quietly. Years of preparation now unfolded exactly as designed. Not because he had planned revenge, because he had planned stability. Benjamin looked at him carefully. One more question. Anthony waited. If Eleanor apologizes tomorrow, do you want to stop this? Anthony thought about the ballroom. Faith's silence. Charles's disappointment. 3 sharp cracks echoing through the room. Then he answered. This isn't about apologies. What is it about? Following the agreements everyone signed? Benjamin smiled faintly. Good answer. Victoria closed her laptop. I've already contacted our document storage provider. Every original record has been secured. Anthony wasn't surprised. I assumed you had. I also requested independent audit preservation. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. You moved quickly. Victoria shrugged. I started when Linda emailed the board agenda. Anthony almost laughed. I should have known. Benjamin looked at both of them. We've spent years preparing for financial disasters. It turns out, he gathered the signed agreements into one organized stack. The disaster wasn't financial. It was human. Anthony stood. So what happens Monday? Benjamin handed him a sealed envelope. Monday morning at 8:30, these notices begin going out. Anthony looked at the envelope, but didn't open it. And after that, Benjamin answered calmly, the system starts asking questions. What kind of questions? The kind that cannot be silenced with speeches. Anthony slipped the envelope into his briefcase. For the first time since leaving the ballroom, he gently touched the fading mark on his cheek. It still stung, but the pain no longer mattered, because by the time the bruise disappeared, every bank auditor, insurer, and corporate registry connected to Brooks Home Supply Group would already be following a trail of signatures that Eleanor herself had approved years before. Monday morning arrived with the kind of quiet that usually followed a summer storm. Anthony woke at 5:15 as always. The bruise on his left cheek had darkened overnight, fading from bright red into a deep shade of purple beneath his eye. He noticed it while shaving. He did not stop. He simply shaved around it with the same careful movements he had practiced for years. Outside the bedroom, the house remained silent. Faith had slept in the guest room after returning home late from the retirement party. Neither of them had tried to begin a conversation. There was nothing useful to say. At 6 o'clock, Anthony poured coffee into his travel mug. Faith entered the kitchen wearing yesterday's worry across her face. She looked at the bruise. I'm sorry. Anthony continued fastening the lid on his mug. For what? She hesitated. For everything. He met her eyes for only a moment. You don't have to apologize for something you didn't do. The sentence landed heavier than if he had blamed her. Faith looked away. My mother was upset. I know. She honestly believes. Anthony gently interrupted. I know what she believes. Silence returned. Faith folded her arms. Are you going to work today? Yes. After what happened, Anthony picked up his briefcase. The trucks still leave this morning. He walked toward the front door. Anthony? He stopped. I never thought she'd hit you. He nodded once. Neither did I. Then he quietly left. The headquarters of Brooks Home Supply Group looked ordinary from the outside. Inside, it felt different. Conversation stopped when Anthony walked through the lobby. Not because people feared him, because everyone had seen the videos. Someone had uploaded multiple recordings from Saturday night before midnight. By sunrise, they had spread through local business circles. Employees didn't know what to believe. They only knew what they had watched. Marcus Jenkins, the overnight security guard, stood from his desk. His expression tightened when he noticed Anthony's face. You okay, sir? Anthony offered the same calm smile. I've been worse. Marcus wanted to say more. Instead, he simply opened the security door. Good to see you. You too. On the 4th floor, Karen Mitchell stood beside Anthony's office before he even reached it. I was going to call you. No need. You have visitors. Anthony wasn't surprised. Who? 2 men from First Midwest Commercial Bank. Anthony nodded. Conference room. They're waiting. Exactly as Benjamin had predicted. Inside the conference room sat 2 commercial banking officers with briefcases already open. Anthony recognized both. David Reynolds, Senior Commercial Lending Officer. Michelle Porter, Corporate Risk Manager. They stood as he entered. David offered a handshake. Anthony. David. Michelle noticed the bruise but politely ignored it. David cleared his throat. I'll get right to it. Anthony appreciated that. We've received a contractual verification notice. I expected you would. David looked mildly surprised. So you're aware? Yes. Michelle opened a folder. Under the lending agreements executed in 2022, we're required to verify current ownership structures for collateralized commercial properties. Anthony nodded. That's correct. David continued. Normally, this takes a few days. This time we'd like to begin immediately, Anthony answered without hesitation. My office will cooperate fully. Neither banker sensed panic. That puzzled them. Most executives became defensive when banks requested emergency verification. Anthony simply asked one question. What documents would you like first? Michelle looked through her checklist. Current ownership registry. Holding company operating agreements. Warehouse title schedules. Asset control matrix. Anthony opened his briefcase. I brought copies. David blinked. You already had them. I usually do. 20 minutes later, the bankers left carrying organized binders. Karen entered immediately afterward. They looked confused. Anthony smiled faintly. They expected resistance. You gave them everything. They're supposed to have it. Karen leaned against the doorway. Anthony? She hesitated. People are talking. I know. They're saying Mrs. Brooks is firing you. Anthony sat behind his desk. They're free to speculate. You aren't worried. Anthony opened his email. Worry doesn't improve documentation. Karen almost laughed. You really are impossible to rattle. Anthony didn't answer. He simply began reviewing overnight shipping reports. Across town, Eleanor Brooks arrived at Brooks Home Supply Group nearly an hour later. She expected a normal Monday. Instead, she found Linda Foster waiting outside the executive conference room. Good morning. Linda's smile looked forced. Morning. Linda handed her a sealed envelope. This arrived by courier at 8:30. Eleanor frowned. From whom? Benjamin Carter. She opened it immediately. Inside was a formal legal notice, request for ownership verification, corporate governance compliance review, mandatory preservation of records. Nothing accused anyone of wrongdoing, nothing threatened a lawsuit. Everything cited provisions from agreements carrying her own signature. Eleanor looked up sharply. What is this? Linda answered honestly. It appears to be a contractual review. Nonsense. She turned pages rapidly. Who authorized this? Linda swallowed. According to these agreements. She pointed carefully toward one paragraph. Mr. Ortiz has that authority if governance responsibilities are materially altered. Eleanor's expression hardened. Call the board. We have a meeting in 30 minutes. Move it up. Linda nodded quickly. Meanwhile, another envelope arrived. Then another. The accounting department received requests from independent auditors asking that all electronic records be preserved. Human Resources received notices instructing that executive email accounts could not be deleted or modified. The legal department received lender correspondence requesting certified ownership schedules. No accusations, only procedure. The building's atmosphere changed within an hour. Phones rang constantly. Department heads whispered in hallways. No one understood why routine verification had suddenly become urgent. Except Anthony. He quietly completed his monthly inventory forecast. At 10:45, Charles knocked on his office door. Anthony stood. Charles looked exhausted. I just came from the boardroom. Anthony waited. They're furious. I imagined they would be. Charles slowly sat down. Eleanor thinks you declared war. Anthony poured him a cup of coffee. I enforced agreements. Charles accepted the cup. That's exactly what Benjamin told them. Anthony remained silent. Charles rubbed his forehead. The banks are asking questions. They're doing their jobs. The insurance company called. Anthony nodded. They're doing theirs too. Charles looked around the orderly office. I've spent 20 years making speeches. You spent 20 years making systems. Anthony smiled slightly. The systems usually last longer. Charles laughed despite himself. Then his smile disappeared. Eleanor still thinks you're bluffing. Anthony looked out the office window. She'll know soon enough. Charles studied him carefully. Tell me honestly. Have you done anything irreversible? Anthony answered truthfully. No. Not yet. Those two words lingered in the room. Charles understood immediately. Nothing permanent had happened. Everything still depended on how the next several days unfolded. But the process had already begun. And once lenders, auditors, insurers, and legal counsel entered the picture, stopping it would require far more than family arguments. Charles stood slowly. I don't know how this ends. Anthony walked him to the door. I don't either. But I know how it begins. Charles looked back. With paperwork. Anthony nodded. With paperwork. As Charles disappeared down the hallway, Anthony's computer chimed with a new email. Sender Midwest Regional Title Services. Subject Urgent Ownership Confirmation Request. The second domino had just fallen, and somewhere upstairs, Eleanor Brooks was beginning to realize that the quiet man she had slapped in front of 200 witnesses wasn't fighting back with anger. He was letting the system do exactly what it had been designed to do. By Tuesday morning, the rumors had divided into two versions. The first spread through social media. Anthony had stolen millions. The Brooks family was covering up a financial scandal. Federal investigators would soon arrive. None of it was true. The second version traveled much more quietly. Commercial lenders were requesting ownership confirmations. Insurance carriers had frozen routine policy amendments until documentation was verified. Independent auditors had been granted unrestricted access to historical records. That version happened to be entirely true. Anthony ignored both. At 6:45 a.m., he unlocked his office, switched on the desk lamp, and resumed reviewing freight contracts from Indianapolis. Karen arrived 15 minutes later carrying 2 coffees. I know you already made your own, she said, placing 1 cup on his desk, but this one's from that bakery you like. Anthony smiled. You didn't have to. I know. She glanced toward this hallway before lowering her voice. The auditors are here. So I heard. They brought 6 people. Anthony looked at his calendar. Conference room B and C. He nodded once. They'll need both. Karen studied him. You're not nervous at all. Anthony closed the inventory report. They're auditors. They're supposed to ask questions. They're supposed to verify answers. She shook her head. I don't understand how you're this calm. Anthony stood. When records are complete, audits become conversations. He picked up a binder. When records are incomplete, they become problems. Karen watched him leave the office carrying 3 neatly labeled binders. She realized something that many others had missed. Anthony had prepared for this long before anyone imagined it would happen. Conference room B looked more like a temporary archive than a meeting room. Portable scanners lined one wall. Laptops covered another. Bankers' boxes sat neatly stacked according to year. Victoria Nguyen greeted Anthony with a brief nod. Morning? Morning. She introduced the lead auditor. Anthony, this is Michael Grant from Grant & Ellison Forensic Accounting. Michael extended his hand. We appreciate your cooperation. Anthony returned the handshake. You'll have it? Michael opened a notebook. Our objective isn't to determine guilt. I understand. Our objective is to reconcile documentation. Anthony smiled faintly. That's much easier. Michael noticed the confidence, but didn't comment. Instead, he began with the simplest question. Who designed the holding company structure? I did. Who approved it? The board. Can you demonstrate that? Anthony slid the first binder across the table. Meeting minutes. Board resolutions. Voting records. In chronological order. Michael opened the binder. Every document carried matching dates, matching signatures, matching attachments. Nothing appeared altered. Nothing appeared missing. He looked toward Victoria. Did you organize these? She shook her head. No. They've been stored this way for years. Michael raised an eyebrow. For years, Anthony answered. I archive every finalized corporate action within 24 hours. Michael slowly closed the binder. Most companies don't. I know. The audit continued. Warehouse ownership, equipment leases, intellectual property assignments, commercial mortgages. Every answer led to another document. Every document pointed toward another approval. The deeper they searched, the more organized everything became. Around mid-morning, another team occupied conference room C. This group focused exclusively on payroll records. Human Resources Director Elaine Foster looked increasingly confused. She whispered to Victoria during a short break. I expected to find executive bonuses. Victoria smiled. So did I. Elaine frowned. There aren't any. For Anthony. Victoria nodded. He declined performance bonuses 3 years in a row. Elaine stared. Why? He requested the money be redirected toward retaining warehouse staff during the supply chain crisis. Elaine blinked twice. No one ever told us, Victoria answered quietly. He asked us not to. That conversation spread faster than either woman expected. Within an hour, supervisors from 2 distribution centers were discussing it over lunch. By early afternoon, several longtime employees remembered similar incidents. Anthony had canceled executive travel budgets. Anthony had reduced consulting expenses. Anthony had renegotiated freight contracts instead of cutting jobs. One memory led to another. None of those decisions had made headlines. They had simply kept people employed. Upstairs, however, the atmosphere felt very different. Eleanor sat inside the executive conference room with 3 board members and outside counsel. Stacks of documents covered the polished oak table. I want to know, she demanded, why we're allowing this circus. Outside counsel adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Brooks, this review is required under agreements signed by the board. I know what I signed. The attorney remained calm. With respect, the documents suggest otherwise. Eleanor glared. Are you accusing me of negligence? No. I'm explaining contractual obligations. One board member, Harold Simmons, cleared his throat. I've reviewed several of the older resolutions. Eleanor looked toward him. And they're comprehensive. What does that mean? It means Anthony anticipated situations like this. Eleanor laughed sharply. So he planned to trap us. Harold slowly shook his head. No. It looks more like he planned to protect the company. The room fell silent. Even Eleanor had no immediate response. Across the building, Charles quietly visited the warehouse operations floor. Employees greeted him warmly. Many had worked for him for decades. Forklifts moved steadily. Orders continued shipping. Business hadn't stopped. That gave him comfort. Warehouse supervisor Luis Ramirez approached. Morning, Charles. Morning. Luis hesitated before speaking again. I heard about Saturday. Charles sighed. So has everyone. Luis folded his arms. I just wanted to tell you something. Charles waited. When COVID hit, We thought layoffs were coming, Charles remembered. So did I. Luis nodded. Anthony came here himself. He met every shift. He explained exactly where the company stood. He promised nobody would lose health insurance. Charles looked surprised. He never told me. Luis smiled. He probably didn't think it mattered. It mattered. Charles stood silently for several moments. One by one, forgotten memories returned. Anthony sleeping in his office during the transportation strike. Anthony driving personally to a warehouse after a tornado damaged the loading docks. Anthony spending Christmas Eve reviewing insurance claims so employees could receive emergency assistance before the holidays. None of those stories appeared in annual reports. Anthony had never mentioned them. He simply moved on to the next problem. By late afternoon, Michael Grant requested one final meeting with Anthony. The auditor closed his notebook. I have one concern. Anthony waited. The documentation is almost unusually complete. Anthony smiled politely. I've heard that before. Michael leaned forward. I've also completed preliminary reconciliation. And so far we haven't found a single unauthorized transfer. Victoria remained silent. She already knew the answer. Michael continued. Every asset movement references supporting resolutions. Every resolution references legal review. Every legal review references tax opinions. He paused. I expected gaps. There aren't any, Anthony answered simply. That was the goal. Michael stood and gathered his files. We'll continue tomorrow. As the auditors left, Victoria remained behind. She looked toward Anthony. News travels fast, he nodded. What now? She handed him her tablet. An internal company discussion board had filled with comments from employees. Most weren't discussing the retirement party anymore. They were discussing payroll, insurance, jobs, the decisions Anthony had made over the years. People were remembering, not because he defended himself, because the documents reminded them of events they had lived through. Anthony scrolled quietly before handing the tablet back. I never wanted this. Victoria understood. I know. He looked through the conference room window toward the parking lot where the auditors loaded another set of archive boxes into their vehicles. The truth usually moves slowly, Victoria smiled. But it keeps moving. Anthony nodded once. And once it starts... His phone vibrated before he could finish the sentence. The caller ID displayed a name neither of them expected. Midwest Strategic Capital, a regional investment firm. Anthony looked at the screen for a moment before answering. Anthony Ortiz speaking. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. Mr. Ortiz, we've been following recent developments. We believe you oversee certain assets that may soon become available. We'd like to discuss a confidential business opportunity. Anthony listened without interrupting. When the call ended, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Victoria studied his expression. Who was it? Anthony looked toward the darkening skyline outside the window. The first buyer. Anthony did not return the call immediately. He looked at the phone for several seconds before placing it face down on the conference table. Victoria noticed. You already know who they are. I've heard of them. Midwest Strategic Capital was one of the largest privately held investment groups in the region. They rarely chased publicity. They bought stable companies, improved operations, held them for years. They had a reputation for protecting employees instead of stripping businesses apart. Anthony finally picked up the phone again. I'll call them back after work. Victoria nodded. That's probably wise. The audit still mattered more. For another 3 hours, Michael Grant's team continued reconciling warehouse titles against operating agreements. Each question produced another document. Each document confirmed another signature. By 4 o'clock, the lead auditor closed the final binder. He removed his glasses. I've spent 23 years doing forensic reviews. Anthony waited. I've never seen records maintained like this. Anthony smiled politely. I appreciate that. Michael shook his head. No. I don't think you understand. This isn't normal. He looked toward Victoria. If someone asked me to reconstruct 8 years of financial history from scratch, he tapped the binders. I could probably do it using only what Mr. Ortiz archived. Victoria smiled. That's exactly why he archived it. Michael packed his files. We'll issue an interim report tomorrow. What should we expect? Michael answered honestly. We haven't found evidence supporting any allegation of unauthorized transfers. He paused. What we have found, he looked directly at Anthony, is unusually disciplined governance. When the auditors left, Karen stepped inside. The phones haven't stopped. Who called? She glanced at her notes. 3 banks, 2 insurance companies, a state licensing office, and she hesitated. Mrs. Brooks. Anthony looked up. Did you answer? I said you were in meetings. What did she say? Karen swallowed. She demanded you call her immediately. Anthony nodded. Anything else? Karen looked uncomfortable. She sounded angry. Anthony almost smiled. I assumed she would. Karen remained standing. Are you really not going to call her or? No. Why not? Anthony closed another file. Because she's reacting emotionally. And I don't negotiate with emotions. Karen slowly nodded. She had worked beside Anthony for nearly 6 years. She had seen suppliers threaten lawsuits. She had watched lenders withdraw financing. She had witnessed transportation strikes and warehouse fires. She had never once seen Anthony hurry because someone raised their voice. After work, Anthony drove toward a quiet office building in Dublin, Ohio. Midwest Strategic Capital occupied the top 3 floors. No oversized logo covered the building. Only discreet bronze lettering beside the entrance. Professional, confident, not flashy. The receptionist greeted him by name before he introduced himself. Mr. Ortiz. They're expecting you. She escorted him into a conference room overlooking the city. A man in his early 50s entered moments later. Dark gray suit, silver hair, measured movements. Anthony. He extended his hand. I'm Samuel Bennett. Anthony returned the handshake. Thank you for meeting with me. Samuel smiled. I appreciate you coming. They sat. Neither ordered coffee. Neither wasted time. Samuel opened a slim leather folder. I'll be direct. I prefer that. We've followed Brooks Home Supply Group for several years. Anthony listened quietly. It's a well-run company. It has strong logistics, stable customers, good regional market share. He paused. But its governance has always interested us. Anthony didn't interrupt. Samuel continued. Several years ago, we noticed a series of sophisticated restructuring decisions. Holding companies, liability separation, asset protection, tax optimization. We wondered who designed them. Anthony remained silent. Samuel smiled. Eventually, we learned your name. He leaned back. Then Saturday happened. Anthony's expression didn't change. Samuel clasped his hands together. We're not interested in family drama. We're interested in infrastructure. Anthony finally spoke. What exactly are you proposing? Samuel slid a single page across the table. We'd like exclusive discussions. Anthony read the heading. Confidential letter of interest. No purchase price appeared. Only broad terms, Samuel explained. If the ownership structure develops the way we believe it might, We'd like the opportunity to negotiate. Anthony folded the paper carefully. You've made assumptions. We have. They may be wrong. Samuel nodded. They might. But if they're correct, he looked directly at Anthony. Certain operating assets could become available, Anthony answered honestly. They're not available. Not today. Samuel smiled again. I noticed you said today. Anthony almost laughed. So did I. The conversation shifted toward employees, warehouse operations, long-term supplier relationships. Samuel surprised Anthony by asking very little about valuation. Instead, he asked about people. How many employees? Approximately 800. What matters most if ownership changes? Anthony answered without hesitation. Payroll continuity, health insurance, pension obligations, distribution schedules. Samuel nodded after each answer. Good. Those are our priorities too. For the first time that evening, Anthony relaxed slightly. He had expected aggressive investors. Instead, he found disciplined operators. As the meeting ended, Samuel stood. I'll leave you with one thought. Anthony waited. Good companies survive because of systems. Great companies survive because of people willing to protect those systems. Anthony extended his hand. If circumstances change. Samuel finished the sentence. Call me. Outside dusk settled across the city. Anthony placed the letter of interest inside his briefcase. He didn't know whether he would ever use it. He only knew it deserved to be filed. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor had gathered 3 board members inside her home. Stacks of legal notices covered the dining room table. She slammed another envelope onto the polished wood. This is insanity. Harold Simmons quietly adjusted his reading glasses. No. It's governance. She glared at him. You're taking his side. I'm taking the document's side. Eleanor pointed toward the pile. He's trying to steal everything. Harold opened one of the operating agreements. I've read this twice. So have I. He isn't claiming ownership. He's exercising rights we approved. Eleanor laughed bitterly. I don't remember approving any of this. Harold looked directly at her. That's because you never read it. The words landed harder than any accusation. For a moment, nobody spoke. Charles quietly entered the room carrying another envelope that had just arrived by courier. He handed it to Eleanor. She tore it open immediately. Inside was another formal notice. This one came from the company's largest commercial lender. Subject: temporary suspension of non-essential asset transfers pending governance verification. Charles slowly sat down. No one's accusing anyone. Eleanor crumpled the letter. They're treating us like criminals. Harold answered softly. No. They're treating us like a company under contractual review. Charles looked toward the dark window. I warned everyone years ago. Eleanor turned sharply. What did you say? I said Anthony read every page. He always did. Another silence settled over the room. Not one person could deny it anymore. At that same moment, Anthony arrived home. The lights were still on. Faith sat alone in the living room. She wasn't watching television. She wasn't reading. She was simply waiting. As Anthony entered, she looked at his face, then at the briefcase in his hand. I need to ask you something. Anthony placed the briefcase beside the stairs. What is it? Faith hesitated. Her voice became almost a whisper. My father. She struggled to finish the sentence. Did he always trust you more than he trusted the rest of us? Anthony looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered with quiet honesty. He trusted me to read what everyone else signed. Faith lowered her eyes. For the first time since Saturday night, she began wondering whether the biggest mistake in the family had never been Anthony's silence. It had been everyone else's refusal to listen. Thursday morning began inside the largest conference room at Brooks Home Supply Group. No decorations, no catered breakfast, no speeches, only documents. A projector illuminated the far wall displaying the title of the meeting, Corporate Governance Review. Every board member sat in silence. Charles Brooks occupied the chair at the head of the table, though he no longer looked like the unquestioned leader of the company he had built. Eleanor sat to his right. Her posture remained confident, but the confidence no longer reached her eyes. Faith sat several seats away quietly, reading a binder that had been delivered only an hour earlier. Benjamin Carter entered exactly at 9 o'clock. Victoria Nguyen followed him with 2 rolling cases filled with binders. Behind them came Michael Grant, the lead forensic auditor. Anthony entered last. He carried nothing except a legal pad and a pen. The fading bruise beneath his left eye remained visible. No one mentioned it. Benjamin stood beside this projector. "Good morning." His voice was calm. "The purpose of today's meeting is not to assign blame." He allowed the sentence to settle. "It is to establish facts." Eleanor folded her arms. "You represent Anthony." "I do. So naturally you'll tell his version." Benjamin shook his head. "No. I'll let your signature tell the story." He clicked the remote. The first document appeared on the screen. Board Resolution, dated 7 years earlier. Title Corporate Asset Protection Initiative. Benjamin looked around the room. "Would everyone please turn to tab 1? Pages rustled throughout the room. Faith opened her binder. Charles adjusted his glasses. Harold Simmons already had the document in front of him. Benjamin continued. "This resolution authorized the creation of holding companies to separate real estate from operating risk." He pointed toward the signature page. "Mrs. Brooks." Eleanor looked at the screen. "Is this your signature?" She frowned. "It appears to be." "Not appears." Benjamin zoomed in. "Is it your signature?" A long pause followed. "Yes." Benjamin nodded once. "No further questions." He pressed the remote again. Another resolution appeared. Commercial Lending Compliance Authorization. "This document," Benjamin said, "authorized Mr. Anthony Ortiz to coordinate restructuring approved by the board." Again, signatures filled the screen. Charles, Eleanor, Harold. 2 outside directors, Linda Foster. Benjamin turned toward Anthony. "Did you draft this?" Anthony answered simply. "Yes." "Did you approve it?" "No." "Who did?" "The board." Benjamin faced the room again. "Correct." Another click. Another document. Pandemic Emergency Governance. Governance Resolution. Victoria stood. "I'd like to explain the circumstances." Benjamin stepped aside. She approached the screen. "In April of that year, freight delays threatened nearly 40% of company revenue." Another slide appeared. Warehouse closures, supplier defaults, transportation disruptions. "We recommended restructuring assets to satisfy lender requirements." She paused. "The board approved every recommendation." Eleanor interrupted. "I don't remember discussing all of this," Victoria answered respectfully. "I understand." "That's why minutes were recorded." She displayed the meeting transcript. Every discussion, every vote, every motion, timestamps, attendance records. Nothing had been reconstructed. Everything had been preserved. Michael Grant stood next. "As independent auditors, our responsibility was to determine whether assets had been transferred without authorization." He placed a summary report on the table. "We reviewed 7 years of transactions." He looked toward Eleanor. "We found no unauthorized transfers." Silence, he continued. "Every transfer referenced board approval." Another silence. "Every board approval referenced legal review." He looked at Anthony. "And every legal review referenced independent tax opinions." Faith slowly lowered her eyes toward her binder. Page after page matched the presentation. Dates, emails, supporting exhibits. She remembered almost none of them. Benjamin spoke again. Let's address another allegation. He projected a spreadsheet listing executive bonuses. Several years showed zeros beside Anthony's name. Victoria explained. Mr. Ortiz voluntarily declined executive incentive payments. Faith looked up. What? Victoria nodded. 3 consecutive years. The funds were redirected toward payroll stabilization. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Benjamin displayed another exhibit. Email correspondence from Anthony. Subject: executive compensation recommendation. The message was brief. I recommend postponing executive bonuses until warehouse staffing levels stabilize. Retaining experienced employees is more valuable than executive incentives. The email ended with Anthony's signature. Charles slowly removed his glasses. I remember this. His voice was almost a whisper. I argued with him. Victoria nodded. He insisted. Benjamin displayed payroll data. Not a single full-time warehouse employee had lost health insurance during the crisis. Not one pension contribution had been missed. Michael Grant spoke again. Our audit confirms those decisions significantly reduced employee turnover. The room remained completely silent. Benjamin advanced to the next slide. Holding company ownership structure. A detailed organizational chart filled the screen. Operating companies, holding companies, real estate entities, equipment leasing entities, everything connected through clear legal relationships. Benjamin pointed toward the chart. This structure has been described publicly as an attempt to hide ownership. He paused. In reality, he clicked again. A list of public filings appeared. Ohio Secretary of State registrations, county property records, commercial lender disclosures, insurance filings, federal tax registrations. Every entity was publicly registered. He looked around the room. Nothing was hidden. Eleanor finally spoke. Then why create so many companies? Anthony answered before Benjamin could. Because banks required stronger asset protection. His voice remained steady. If one operating company failed, he pointed toward the organizational chart. The warehouses remained protected, Victoria added quietly. Without that structure, Brooks Home Supply Group likely would not have survived the supply chain crisis. Faith stared at Anthony. For years, she had accepted her mother's description. Secretive, controlling, overly cautious. Now every accusation dissolved beneath documents carrying the family's own signatures. Benjamin reached the final section. I have one last exhibit. The projector displayed a video, not from the retirement party, from a board meeting held 6 years earlier. Charles appeared on screen. His younger voice filled the room. Anthony, I want you handling every part of this restructuring. Video Anthony answered. I'll need written authority. Charles laughed. You'll have it. Video Eleanor spoke next. Prepare whatever documents the attorneys recommend. The recording stopped. Benjamin turned off the projector. No further presentation. No applause followed. Only silence. The kind of silence created when certainty collapses. Charles slowly stood. He looked first toward Anthony, then toward the rest of the board. I spent years believing I remembered every important decision. He placed one hand on the table. I was wrong. His eyes settled briefly on Eleanor. We approved these actions. No one disagreed. Faith closed her binder. Her hands trembled slightly. She remembered sitting beside her mother at countless family dinners while Anthony absorbed sarcastic remarks without responding. She remembered questioning him about financial secrecy. She remembered remaining silent after the 3 slaps. The weight of those memories settled heavily across her shoulders. Eleanor remained seated. For the first time in anyone's memory, she had nothing prepared to say. Benjamin broke the silence. The audit is complete. He gathered his papers carefully. The governance review confirms that Mr. Ortiz acted within the authority granted by this board. He paused. However, every eye turned toward him. The contractual review has also confirmed something else. He lifted a sealed folder from his briefcase. Several operating agreements now grant Mr. Ortiz options that become effective because of the governance actions taken after Saturday night's incident. Anthony looked toward the folder, but did not reach for it. Benjamin placed it gently on the conference table. "What happens next," he said quietly, "depends entirely on whether those options are exercised." Every person in the room understood the meaning behind his words. The meeting had answered every accusation, but the most important decision still hadn't been made, and only Anthony could make it. The conference room emptied slowly. No one hurried toward the elevators. No one gathered in small groups to exchange opinions. For the first time in years, the documents had spoken louder than personalities. Anthony remained where he was, quietly organizing his legal pad. He had written only 3 short lines during the entire meeting. Facts don't argue. Procedures don't panic. "Wait." Benjamin approached. "You handled that well." Anthony looked up. "There wasn't much to say." Benjamin smiled. "Exactly." He gathered his briefcase. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." Anthony nodded. "I appreciate everything." Benjamin placed one hand on the back of a chair. "This isn't over." "I know. But today mattered." After Benjamin left, only 3 people remained in the room: Anthony, Faith, Charles. Charles slowly walked toward Anthony. For several seconds he searched for the right words. Finally he spoke. "I failed you." Anthony looked at him calmly. "You trusted me. I didn't protect you." Anthony didn't answer immediately. He thought about the retirement party, the 3 slaps, the hundreds of witnesses, Faith's silence. Then he answered honestly. "You tried." Charles lowered his eyes. "I should have done more." Anthony reached for his briefcase. "We all make decisions." Charles nodded slowly. "Some cost more than others." He hesitated before asking one final question. "Are you really considering selling?" Anthony didn't lie. "I'm considering every option." Charles understood. Nothing more needed to be said. He quietly left the room. The door closed behind him. Only Faith remained. She still hadn't moved from her chair. The thick binder lay open in front of her. Highlighted pages, emails, meeting minutes, resolutions, evidence she had never bothered to read. Anthony waited patiently. Eventually she spoke. "I counted them." Anthony looked at her. "The signatures." She touched one page. "My mother's signature appears 68 times. Another page. My father's 64. Another. Mine." Her voice broke slightly. 21. Anthony remained silent. "I signed them." "Yes." "I never read them." "No." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I trusted Mom." Anthony didn't interrupt. "I thought she understood everything." She looked directly at him. Instead, she closed the binder. "You did." Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Faith took a slow breath. "I need you to answer one question. If I can. Did you ever hide money?" "No." "Did you ever try to take the company for?" "No." "Did you ever plan any of this?" Anthony considered her carefully. "What do you mean by this?" She gestured toward the boardroom. "The audits." "The banks." "The legal notices." He answered truthfully. "I planned systems. I never planned Saturday." Faith looked down again. I watched her hit you. Anthony said nothing. I didn't stop her. No. I should have. Anthony quietly pulled out the chair across from her and sat. For the first time since they had married, neither of them seemed interested in defending themselves, only understanding what had happened. Faith wiped her eyes. I kept telling myself there had to be something I didn't know. There was. But it wasn't what Mom said. Anthony folded his hands. You trusted someone. Yes. That isn't a crime. Faith shook her head. No. But refusing to listen became one. The sentence lingered between them. Anthony remembered countless evenings over the past 2 years. Faith questioning small financial decisions. Faith repeating concerns Eleanor had planted. Faith slowly replacing conversations with assumptions. None of it had happened overnight. Relationships rarely broke all at once. They drifted, one misunderstanding, then another, until silence replaced trust. Faith spoke again. I found something in my email this morning. Anthony waited. It was from 4 years ago. She opened her phone. You sent me a message. She read aloud. Please don't sign the revised shareholder consent until we've discussed it together. The language has changed. She lowered the phone. I ignored it. Anthony remembered. Eleanor had insisted the revision was routine. Faith had signed it during a family dinner. Anthony had simply updated the files afterward. I didn't even ask why, Faith whispered. I just assumed Mom was right. Anthony didn't criticize her. He never had. Instead, he asked softly, Why are you telling me this now? She looked at him. Because today I realized something. What? I don't remember the last time I believed you before I believed her. Anthony felt the weight of the words more than any anger, not because they surprised him, because they confirmed what he had quietly watched happen for years. Faith stood. I don't expect forgiveness. Anthony remained seated. I don't even know if we're talking about our marriage or the business anymore. She gave a sad smile. Maybe both. Another silence. Faith picked up the binder. I spent all morning reading your emails. Anthony raised an eyebrow. There were hundreds. I know. Do you know what I couldn't find? He waited. A single message where you insulted my mother. A single complaint. A single attempt to embarrass anyone. She swallowed hard. I kept waiting for proof she was right. She looked around the now empty conference room. There wasn't any. Anthony slowly stood. I wasn't trying to prove her wrong. I know. You were trying to keep everything together. He didn't answer, because she was finally seeing it herself. They walked toward the hallway together. Employees glanced up as they passed. No one spoke. Near the elevators, Faith stopped. I have to see my mother. Anthony nodded. What are you going to say? Faith looked through the conference room window, where the projector still displayed the company organizational chart. I'm going to ask her one question. What question? Why? Anthony looked at her quietly. Faith continued. Not why she slapped you. Why she stopped trusting the only person who was protecting all of us. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Anthony remained standing in the hallway. Across town, Eleanor sat alone inside her office. The legal folders remained spread across her desk. She hadn't moved them. Her phone rang repeatedly. She ignored every call. Finally, the office door opened without a knock. Faith entered. She closed the door behind her. Neither woman embraced. Neither smiled. Eleanor spoke first. I suppose you've come to defend him? Faith's expression remained calm. No. I've come to understand you. Eleanor leaned back. There's nothing to understand. Faith slowly placed the thick governance binder on the desk. The sound echoed through the quiet office. There are 83 board resolutions in here. Eleanor crossed her arms. So, you signed almost all of them. I trusted my advisors. Faith looked directly into her mother's eyes. No! You trusted Anthony. Eleanor's face tightened. For years. Faith gently opened the binder to the first signature page. Then one day, she touched the ink beneath Eleanor's signature. You decided he was the enemy. She looked up again. I need you to tell me exactly when that happened. For the first time since the retirement party, Eleanor had no immediate answer. And the silence that followed said more than any accusation ever could. Anthony spent the weekend exactly as he had planned. Saturday morning, he drove Mason to his youth soccer practice. He stood beside the field with a paper cup of coffee, while parents discussed school schedules, summer vacations, and weekend barbecues. No one mentioned the Brooks family. No one knew. For 90 minutes, Anthony was simply a father watching his son chase a ball across wet grass. Mason jogged over during a water break. Dad? Yeah. Are you coming to my game next Saturday, too? Anthony smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Mason grinned before running back toward his teammates. Anthony watched him disappear into the group. Everything he had done over the past 8 years suddenly became much simpler in his mind. Companies, contracts, board meetings, audits, none of them mattered if they failed to protect moments like this. His phone vibrated. Samuel Bennett. Anthony answered. Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting. You're not. Samuel spoke without unnecessary introductions. Our investment committee met yesterday. Anthony waited. We're prepared to move forward. So soon? We've completed enough preliminary analysis. Anthony looked toward the soccer field. And what exactly are you proposing? A full acquisition. Anthony remained quiet. Samuel continued. Not of your family. Not of their reputation. Only of the operating assets controlled through the holding companies if they become legally available. Anthony understood the distinction. Samuel wasn't trying to buy Brooks Home Supply Group as people imagined it. He wanted the infrastructure, warehouses, distribution rights, equipment leases, operating entities, the same assets Anthony had spent years protecting. Samuel continued. We're also prepared to guarantee every employee's position for a minimum of 24 months. Anthony's attention sharpened. And pensions. Protected. Health insurance. Maintained. No forced warehouse closures. None. Anthony looked across the field again. Children laughed while chasing an oversized soccer ball. The contrast felt almost surreal. He had spent weeks watching adults destroy trust. Children rebuilt teams every few minutes without thinking about pride. I'll review everything, Samuel answered calmly. I expected nothing less. The call ended. Anthony didn't immediately return to watching practice. Instead, he sat quietly in the folding chair. The decision ahead wasn't emotional. It wasn't even personal anymore. It was structural. The governance review had confirmed that the holding companies possessed contractual options triggered by the board's attempt to remove his responsibilities without following existing agreements. Those options allowed several operating entities to require either a governance correction or an ownership transition. Benjamin had explained it 3 different times. Anthony could either spend years fighting inside a broken family business or allow an orderly transaction under agreements everyone had signed. Monday morning began inside Benjamin Carter's office. Samuel Bennett arrived with 3 attorneys. Benjamin brought 2 associates. Victoria occupied the opposite end of the conference table beside a mountain of financial schedules. No raised voices, no dramatic speeches, only business. Samuel opened the meeting. We've completed preliminary due diligence. He slid a thick proposal toward Benjamin. Asset purchase agreement. Benjamin reviewed the first pages carefully. Anthony remained silent. price, employee protections, vendor obligations, environmental liability, real estate schedules. Everything appeared where it belonged. Victoria quietly reviewed pension language. After 20 minutes, she looked up. They preserved every retirement obligation. Samuel nodded. As promised, Benjamin examined another section. No executive layoffs. Samuel smiled faintly. We're buying operations, not politics. Anthony appreciated that answer. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours, paragraph by paragraph, clause by clause. Nothing moved quickly. By early afternoon, Benjamin finally leaned back. I have only one concern. Samuel waited. The transition date. Samuel nodded. We can move it. Anthony looked toward Benjamin. What do you recommend? Benjamin answered immediately. Give employees time. Not management. Employees. Samuel considered it. 30 days. Anthony shook his head. 60. Samuel smiled. Done. The agreement changed. No arguments. Only initials beside revised language. Across town, Brooks Home Supply Group held another emergency board meeting. Eleanor entered expecting more legal discussions. Instead, she found Charles sitting quietly beside Linda Foster. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. The constant conflict had aged him. Harold Simmons spoke first. We've received notice. Eleanor frowned. Notice of what? Linda slid a document across the table. Formal exercise of contractual rights. Governance election. Eleanor skimmed the first page. What is this? Harold answered. The operating companies have exercised provisions under Article 9. They're requesting transition. Transition to whom? Harold hesitated. Potentially. He glanced toward Charles. The new ownership. Eleanor stared. That's impossible. Linda quietly opened another binder. No. It's contractual. Eleanor slammed the folder shut. Anthony can't sell my company. Charles finally spoke. He isn't. She turned toward him. What? He can't sell something we own. Charles slowly shook his head. Not directly. Linda carefully displayed the ownership chart again. For years, the warehouse's equipment and operating assets were separated. Exactly as the board instructed. Harold continued. The holding companies control the operating infrastructure. And under the agreements, he pointed toward one paragraph. Certain governance failures activate purchase options. Eleanor stared blankly. So what exactly are you saying? Charles answered quietly. I'm saying we signed documents. And Anthony followed them. Silence. The room felt colder. Linda's phone rang. She answered softly before looking toward Charles. They're here. Charles nodded. Send them in. Benjamin Carter entered. Anthony walked beside him. Neither man appeared hurried. Benjamin placed a sealed envelope in front of every board member. These are formal notices. Eleanor didn't touch hers. Benjamin continued. Midwest Strategic Capital has submitted a binding offer. Gasps echoed softly around the room. Faith looked toward Anthony. She hadn't known. Neither had Charles. Only Benjamin and Victoria. Eleanor laughed bitterly. You found a buyer, Anthony answered calmly. A buyer found us, Benjamin continued. The proposed acquisition preserves every employee position, maintains pension obligations, honors supplier contracts, retains existing warehouse operations. Victoria added another point. No layoffs, no facility closures, no interruption of payroll. Harold slowly read through the summary. The offer is... He looked surprised. Very fair. Benjamin nodded. They're paying full market valuation. Charles quietly reviewed another page. He finally looked at Anthony. You negotiated employee guarantees. Anthony nodded. That mattered most. Charles smiled sadly. I should have expected that. Eleanor stood abruptly. I refuse. Benjamin remained calm. Mrs. Brooks. This transaction doesn't require unanimous approval. She stared at him. What? He pointed towards the operating agreement. The contractual options became effective after governance violations were confirmed. She turned toward Anthony. You planned this. Anthony met her eyes steadily. No. I prepared for instability. There is a difference. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Faith looked toward the stack of purchase documents, then toward Anthony. She remembered the retirement party, the 3 slaps, his single sentence. You'll soon understand what every signature actually meant. Only now did she realize he hadn't been making a threat. He had simply been stating a fact. Benjamin uncapped his pen. The closing is scheduled for Friday. Anthony quietly signed the first page. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, only with the same steady handwriting that had appeared beneath thousands of corporate documents over the previous 8 years. The first signature took less than 5 seconds, yet it quietly set in motion the legal transfer of everything Eleanor believed she still controlled. The closing took place the following Friday, not in a courtroom, not in the Brooks headquarters, not in front of reporters. It happened inside a quiet conference room on the 22nd floor of a downtown Columbus law office. There were no television cameras, no photographers, only attorneys, accountants, lenders, title specialists, and representatives from Midwest Strategic Capital. Anthony arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Benjamin Carter was already reviewing the final closing checklist. Victoria sat beside him, comparing the electronic schedules against the original paper copies. Every page had already been reviewed 3 times. Benjamin looked up. You sleep at all last night? Anthony smiled faintly. Enough. Benjamin nodded. I figured. Across the room, Samuel Bennett shook hands with commercial lenders who had financed part of the acquisition. No one appeared excited. Large business transactions rarely resembled movies. They resembled accounting. At precisely 9 o'clock, the title officer stood. We're ready. Everyone took their seats. The process began. Warehouse 1. Signature. Warehouse 2. Signature. Equipment leasing entity. Signature. Distribution operating company. Signature. Commercial vehicle holdings. Signature. Every transfer required another signature, another verification, another confirmation. Hours passed. No raised voices. Only paper sliding across polished wood. Anthony signed where Benjamin indicated. Samuel signed beside him. Commercial lenders acknowledged funding. Title representatives confirmed recording instructions. The entire process felt almost mechanical. Years of preparation had turned one enormous decision into hundreds of small administrative steps. By early afternoon, the final document reached Anthony. Benjamin quietly tapped the signature line. This is the last one. Anthony read every paragraph. He always did. Nothing had changed from the negotiated version. Employee guarantees remained. Vendor protections remained. Retirement obligations remained. Community warehouse commitments remained. Only after confirming every page did he sign. The title officer smiled politely. Congratulations. Anthony simply nodded. The transaction officially closed. No applause followed. Samuel extended his hand. I appreciate the professionalism. Anthony shook it. Take care of them. Samuel understood exactly who them meant. Our reputation depends on it. Anthony believed him. Outside the building, the afternoon sun reflected from office windows across downtown Columbus. Anthony stood on the sidewalk for a moment. 8 years, thousands of documents, hundreds of meetings, countless quiet decisions. It had ended with one signature. His phone vibrated. Charles. Anthony answered immediately. Hello? I heard. Anthony remained quiet. It's finished. Yes. Charles sighed. I wanted to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. Anthony waited. I've officially retired. Anthony looked toward the courthouse across the street. I thought you already had. Charles laughed softly. I announced it. Today I accepted it. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Charles continued. I also resigned from every remaining board position. Anthony understood why. The company Charles had built no longer existed in the same form. Holding on to titles would change nothing. I hope you find some peace, Charles answered quietly. I think I might. He hesitated. Thank you. Anthony frowned slightly. For what? For protecting something I stopped paying attention to. The call ended. Anthony slipped the phone into his pocket. He did not celebrate. Instead, he drove toward one of the company's oldest distribution centers outside Columbus. The afternoon shift had just begun. Forklifts moved steadily between loading docks. Employees loaded trailers exactly as they had every Friday for decades. Business continued. Luis Ramirez spotted Anthony near the loading dock. You came, Anthony smiled. I wanted to see everyone. Luis walked over. We heard. Anthony nodded. You're still employed. Luis laughed. We figured that out when the new management introduced themselves. They're keeping every shift. They're even honoring seniority. Anthony looked relieved. Good. Luis studied him carefully. You know, what? Most people thought you'd fire half the company. Anthony shook his head. They were never the problem. Luis extended his hand. Thank you. Anthony accepted it. I didn't do it alone. Luis smiled. Maybe. But somebody had to care enough to write it into the contracts. Nearby, several warehouse employees noticed Anthony. One by one, they walked over. No speeches, no gifts, only handshakes. Simple words. Thank you. We appreciate you. My daughter kept her insurance. I'm retiring next year because you protected the pension. Anthony accepted every handshake with quiet humility. He never corrected anyone. He never explained how many people had helped. He simply listened. Across town, the Brooks residence felt strangely empty. Eleanor sat alone in the formal living room. Stacks of newspapers lay unopened on the coffee table. Business journals had already reported the acquisition. None mentioned the retirement party. None mentioned the slaps. Only public filings, corporate governance, asset transition, employee retention facts. Exactly as Benjamin had predicted. The truth had entered the public record without emotion. Faith entered quietly. She carried a cardboard storage box. What is that, your office? Eleanor frowned. My office? I packed everything. Family photographs, awards, business cards, old meeting notebooks. Faith placed the box beside the sofa. You don't have to do this. Faith looked around the enormous room. I think I do. Silence settled between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. I lost everything, Faith answered gently. No. You lost control. Eleanor looked away. It's the same thing. Faith slowly shook her head. No. It isn't. Another silence. Longer this time. Faith sat across from her mother. Do you know what hurts most? Eleanor didn't answer. I spent years believing strength meant winning every argument. She looked toward the window. Anthony never argued. He just prepared. The words lingered in the room. Eleanor stared at the cardboard box. Inside lay decades of accomplishments, awards, plaques, photographs with politicians, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, recognition dinners. All reminders of a woman who believed influence lasted forever, and none of them could change what contracts had already accomplished. Meanwhile, Anthony drove home before sunset. The house looked peaceful. Mason rode his bicycle in the driveway. When he saw his father, he smiled. "Dad." Anthony parked the car. Mason hurried over. "Guess what?" "What?" "I scored 2 goals today." Anthony laughed. "That's better than my day." Mason looked confused. "Weren't you working?" "I was." "Did everything go okay?" Anthony looked at his son. "It did." Mason nodded as if that answered every important question. Maybe it did. Inside the house, Faith stood in the kitchen. She watched Anthony through the window as Mason excitedly described every play from practice. Neither of them talked about companies, or contracts, or board meetings. Just soccer, homework, weekend plans. Faith quietly realized something. Anthony had never been trying to build an empire. He had been trying to build stability. Everyone else had mistaken stability for ambition, and by the time they understood the difference, the empire was already gone. 3 months passed. Autumn arrived quietly across central Ohio. The maple trees outside Anthony's home turned shades of deep red and gold, while the morning air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves instead of summer humidity. For the first time in years, Anthony drove to work without thinking about board meetings, without wondering who might question another document, without anticipating another emergency call from a warehouse. Life had become ordinary. He welcomed it. At 7:30 on a Monday morning, Anthony unlocked the glass door of a modest office building in Dublin. A simple brushed steel plaque beside the entrance read, "Ortiz Governance Advisory." No oversized logo, no marble lobby, no receptionist wearing designer clothing, just a clean office with natural light, organized desks, and conference rooms equipped for serious work. Anthony had spent decades watching businesses fail for reasons that had nothing to do with products. Most collapsed because families stopped communicating, partners stopped reading, executives stopped documenting decisions. His new company existed to prevent those mistakes. The first employee to arrive was Victoria Nguyen. She carried 2 coffees and a laptop. "I still think your office starts too early." Anthony smiled. 8 o'clock isn't early. It is for accountants. You've worked with me for 7 years. I know. And somehow I'm still surprised. They laughed quietly. It was a lighter conversation than either of them could have imagined only a few months earlier. Victoria placed a folder on Anthony's desk. "Our first client." Anthony opened it. A 3rd-generation manufacturing company from Dayton. 2 brothers, 1 sister. Conflicting ownership expectations. No updated shareholder agreement. Outdated estate planning. Anthony immediately recognized the warning signs. He looked toward Victoria. "This is fixable." She nodded. "That's why they called." At 9 o'clock, the family arrived. Anthony greeted each person individually. No lecture, no assumptions. He simply asked one question. "When was the last time all 3 of you read the same document together?" The room became quiet. One brother finally answered. "Never." Anthony smiled gently. "That's where we'll begin." Over the next several weeks, word spread. Not through advertising, through referrals, bankers, attorneys, CPAs, business owners who appreciated someone who preferred preparation over drama. Every new client reminded Anthony why he had accepted Samuel Bennett's offer. He hadn't sold because he wanted wealth. He had sold because stable businesses deserved stable leadership. Meanwhile, Midwest Strategic Capital quietly fulfilled every promise it had made. No warehouses closed. No employees lost health insurance. Vendor relationships remained intact. Modern inventory software replaced outdated systems. Drivers received newer trucks. Warehouse equipment was upgraded without disrupting operations. Luis Ramirez noticed the changes immediately. One afternoon he called Anthony. "You should come see this." Anthony drove to the Columbus Distribution Center after work. The loading docks looked different. New forklifts, improved safety markings, updated conveyor systems. Nothing flashy. Everything practical. Luis walked beside him. "They've invested more in 3 months than we expected in 3 years." Anthony nodded. "They're thinking long-term." Luis stopped beside a newly installed break room. "You picked the right buyer?" Anthony looked through the window. Employees laughed while eating lunch. No fear, no rumors. Just work. "I picked the one that promised to keep people first." Luis smiled. And they did. Across town, Charles Brooks adjusted slowly to retirement. He no longer woke before sunrise to review sales reports. Instead, he spent mornings fishing at Alum Creek Reservoir or reading history books he had purchased years earlier but never opened. One afternoon, Anthony visited him. Charles greeted him on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. "I was wondering when you'd stop by." Anthony sat down. "How are you?" Charles looked towards the trees. "I'm learning how not to check my phone every 10 minutes. Anthony laughed softly. "That's harder than it sounds." "It is." They spoke for nearly an hour. Not once did they discuss lawsuits, or acquisitions, or board meetings. Instead, they talked about Mason, fishing, old baseball games, simple things. Eventually, Charles became serious. "I've had a lot of time to think." Anthony waited. "I always believed leadership meant making decisions." He looked down at his coffee. "You taught me something." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Leadership also means creating systems that still work after you're gone." Anthony didn't answer. He simply accepted the compliment. As the afternoon ended, Charles reached into a small wooden box beside his chair. He removed the old stainless steel Brooks Home Supply Group lapel pin he had worn for decades. "I don't need this anymore." He handed it to Anthony. Anthony looked at it quietly. "I can't take this." Charles smiled. "I'm not giving it to the executive. I'm giving it to this man who protected everything it was supposed to represent." After a long pause, Anthony accepted it. Not as a trophy, as a memory. Faith's journey proved much slower. She and Anthony had agreed to separate temporarily after the acquisition. Not because either wanted revenge, because trust could not be rebuilt through promises. It had to be rebuilt through time. Faith rented a small townhouse 15 minutes away. Mason spent equal time with both parents. The arrangement remained peaceful. Every Wednesday evening, they met together for dinner with Mason. No arguments, no accusations. Only conversations about school, soccer, homework. One evening after dinner, Faith walked Anthony to his car. "I've started seeing a counselor." Anthony looked at her. "I think that's good. I needed someone to explain how I stopped thinking for myself." Anthony remained quiet. Faith continued. "My mother influenced me. But I made the decisions." Anthony nodded. "Yes. I blamed her for everything at first." She shook her head. "That wasn't honest." Anthony appreciated the admission. "I signed documents. I ignored your messages. I stayed silent." Her voice became softer. I own those choices." Anthony looked at her for a long moment. Accountability sounded different from apology. Apologies often asked for immediate forgiveness. Accountability accepted consequences. "I see that." Faith smiled sadly. "That's all I hoped you'd say." As winter approached, Eleanor rarely appeared in Columbus business circles. She sold the large family home and moved into a smaller condominium overlooking the river. Not because she lacked money. The acquisition had paid every shareholder fairly. She simply no longer wanted the constant reminders. One Saturday afternoon, she surprised Anthony by calling. He answered after a moment. "Hello? It's Eleanor." "I know." Several seconds passed before she spoke again. "I won't ask you to forgive me." Anthony listened. "I've spent months reading." "Reading what?" "The documents." He almost smiled. "All of them." She laughed once. "I should have done that years ago." Silence followed. "I wanted you to know." Her voice faltered. "I finally understand what you were protecting." Anthony looked through the office window toward employees preparing for another client meeting. "I'm glad." She didn't ask to meet. She didn't defend herself. She simply ended the call. For Anthony, that was enough. Some relationships never returned to what they once were. They became quieter, more honest. Sometimes that was the healthiest outcome. On the first Monday of December, Anthony stood outside Ortiz Governance Advisory before sunrise. Employees began arriving one by one. The office lights came on. Inside waited another family business, hoping to avoid becoming the next Brooks story. Anthony adjusted his tie, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside with the same calm discipline that had guided him through every difficult season of his life. Only now, instead of protecting one family's company, he had dedicated himself to protecting many. 1 year later, the calendar on Anthony Ortiz's office wall showed the first Monday in October. He still arrived before sunrise. Some habits never changed. At 7:15 a.m., he unlocked the front door of Ortiz Governance Advisory and switched on the lobby lights. The office remained quiet, except for the low hum of the heating system preparing for another cool Ohio morning. On the reception desk sat a framed sentence that every new client noticed. "Read before you sign. Understand before you trust. Document before you decide." Anthony had never intended those words to become a slogan. They simply described the way he believed life should be lived. By 8 o'clock, the office had filled with activity. Victoria reviewed financial statements with a manufacturing client from Cincinnati. 2 attorneys met with a family-owned trucking company from Indiana. A construction business from Kentucky waited in the conference room, hoping to settle a succession dispute before it became another public-family conflict. Anthony walked from room to room, listening more than speaking. He asked careful questions. He rarely offered immediate answers. That had become his reputation. Not the consultant who spoke the most. The consultant who made everyone read the documents together before making another decision. One client laughed after finishing a meeting. "You know, Mr. Ortiz, I expected expensive legal theories." Anthony smiled. "What you received was a checklist." The client laughed again. "It probably saved our company." Anthony answered honestly. "Simple systems usually do." After the morning meetings ended, Victoria entered his office carrying a familiar business magazine. She placed it on his desk. The cover featured an article about Midwest Strategic Capital. Anthony glanced at the headline. "Regional Investment Group expands distribution network across 3 states." He opened the magazine. There were photographs of renovated warehouses, modern logistics equipment, new hiring initiatives, expanded apprenticeship programs. Near the end of the article, one paragraph caught his attention. Employee retention remained above 96%, following the acquisition, significantly outperforming industry averages. Anthony quietly closed the magazine. Victoria noticed. "Looks like Samuel kept every promise." Anthony nodded. "I believed he would." "You chose well." Anthony looked out the office window. "I chose people." Everything else followed. Later that afternoon, Samuel Bennett stopped by unexpectedly. He carried no attorneys, no contracts, only 2 paper cups of coffee. "I was in the area." Anthony smiled. "So was I." They sat in Anthony's office overlooking the parking lot. Samuel looked relaxed. "You know, He took a sip of coffee. We've completed the first annual review. Anthony waited. I thought you'd want to hear the numbers. I'm listening. Samuel opened a small notebook. Revenue increased 12%. Safety incidents dropped 23%. Warehouse efficiency improved. Anthony nodded politely. Samuel continued, but those aren't my favorite numbers. He turned another page. We haven't had a single involuntary layoff. Anthony smiled. Good. Samuel leaned back. I've acquired companies for almost 30 years. I've learned something. Anthony looked at him. People don't remember purchase prices. They remember whether someone kept their word. Anthony quietly lifted his coffee cup. To keeping promises. Samuel lifted his. To keeping promises. Across town, Charles Brooks had discovered a peaceful routine. Every Tuesday morning, he volunteered at a local vocational school, mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to build small businesses. He no longer introduced himself as the founder of Brooks Home Supply Group. He simply introduced himself as Charles. The students appreciated that. One afternoon, Anthony visited him after class. Charles pointed toward a group of teenagers repairing small engines. They remind me of myself. Anthony smiled. They remind me of you, too. Charles laughed. I hope they make fewer mistakes. Anthony answered gently. They probably won't. They'll just survive different ones. Charles nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. As they walked toward the parking lot, Charles looked unusually serious. I have one favor. Anthony waited. If those kids ever ask what my biggest business lesson was, he paused. Tell them hire someone who reads every contract. Anthony laughed. I'll remember. Meanwhile, Faith's life had found a different rhythm. The separation had eventually become a respectful divorce. There had been no courtroom battles, no ugly public accusations, only careful conversations focused on Mason. They attended school events together, soccer tournaments, parent-teacher conferences, birthdays. Neither pretended the past had never happened. Neither allowed it to poison the future. One Saturday morning after Mason's soccer game, Faith walked beside Anthony toward the parking lot. Mason raced ahead with teammates. Faith smiled as she watched him. He's getting faster. Anthony nodded. He practices. He gets that from you. Anthony laughed softly. No. He gets it from believing improvement takes time. Faith looked at him. I've been thinking about something. What? If Saturday night had never happened? Anthony knew exactly which Saturday she meant. Would you ever have left? He thought carefully before answering. I don't know. You really don't know? I was trying to save both the business and the marriage. Faith lowered her eyes. I know that now. Another quiet moment passed. I'm grateful, she said softly, that you never tried to destroy us. Anthony looked toward Mason, celebrating another goal with his teammates. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to stop losing. Faith nodded slowly. For the first time in a year, neither of them felt the need to say anything more. Not every relationship could be repaired. Some could simply become peaceful. That was enough. Late that autumn, Anthony received one final handwritten letter. The return address surprised him, Eleanor Brooks. He opened it inside his office after everyone had gone home. The letter contained only a single page. Anthony, there was a time when I believed speaking the loudest meant being the strongest. I confused confidence with wisdom. I confused control with leadership. The 3 slaps I gave you embarrassed you for a few seconds. The choices I made before those slaps embarrassed me for much longer. You never answered anger with anger. At the time, I believed your silence meant weakness. Now I understand it required more strength than I possessed. I don't expect forgiveness. I simply wanted the truth to exist somewhere in my own handwriting. Eleanor. Anthony folded the letter carefully. He placed it inside a file cabinet rather than throwing it away. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it honestly. As the sun disappeared beyond the Columbus skyline, Anthony locked the office and walked toward his car. The same Honda Accord was gone now, finally replaced after years of dependable service with another modest sedan. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress strangers. His phone buzzed. A message from Mason. "Dad, don't forget. Science fair tomorrow. I need you there by 6. Anthony smiled and replied immediately. "Wouldn't miss it." He started the engine and drove home through familiar streets. Traffic moved steadily. Store lights reflected across the windshield. Another ordinary evening. Exactly the kind of life he had been protecting all along. The people who once judged Anthony by his quiet voice never understood where his strength came from. It wasn't hidden wealth. It wasn't secret influence. It wasn't revenge. His strength came from preparation when everyone else relied on assumptions, from patience when everyone else demanded immediate reactions, from evidence when everyone else preferred rumors. The 3 slaps had echoed through a ballroom for only a few seconds. The decisions Anthony made afterward shaped lives for years. Employees kept their jobs, retirees kept their pensions, families kept their health insurance, a father kept his promise to his son, and a quiet man proved without ever raising his voice that real justice rarely arrives through anger. It arrives through truth that has been patiently prepared long before anyone realizes they will need it. Sometimes the strongest response is not the fastest one. When emotions run high, people often believe the loudest voice wins. But lasting victories are usually built long before the conflict begins. They come from integrity, careful preparation, honest work, and the discipline to let facts speak when accusations become overwhelming. Anthony didn't defeat anyone by seeking revenge. He simply trusted the systems he had built with patience and honesty, allowing truth to reveal itself at the right time. In everyday life, most of us will never negotiate multi-million-dollar business deals or face a room full of corporate executives. But we all experience moments when we're misunderstood, unfairly judged, or pressured to react emotionally. Those moments remind us that protecting our character, keeping good records, honoring our commitments, and thinking clearly under pressure can change the outcome of conflicts far more than anger ever could. Have you ever been in a situation where staying calm completely changed the outcome? I'd genuinely love to read your story, so share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone else who is going through a difficult season right now. And if you enjoyed this journey of quiet strength, unexpected justice, and meaningful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story will introduce another ordinary person whose greatest advantage isn't power or wealth, but the courage to stay patient until the truth finally